Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Give it a couple of minutes for a few people that are still joining. We've got a pretty good crowd here this morning. So I guess I will get started. I'll kick us off with some housekeeping. So welcome to The Future is SASE, Unifying Network and Security Strategies with US Signal and Cato Networks. We're glad you're here. Before we get started, I'd like to mention a few housekeeping items. We'll be sharing some quick poll questions during the session, so please participate to help us make this more interactive and relevant for you. We'll be answering questions at the end of the presentation, so please submit your questions throughout the session. After the webinar, a brief survey will pop up before you log off. We appreciate your feedback. And finally, this session is being recorded. After the webinar, you'll receive a follow-up email with access to the recording and any materials that are shared. Now, without further ado, I'll hand it over to Pat Cannon. Enjoy the session.
Great, thanks, Cindy. All right, so appreciate everybody joining here. Pat Cannon, I'm the field CTO for US Signal. I am joined by Roger Gallego, and Roger represents the central US for Cato Networks. So Cato Networks is a large partner with US Signal, and we're going to talk all things network here today, and specifically SASE. So in my 25-year history as a nerd, 12 of those have been here at US Signal. And part of the choice for me at the time, when I left the operational world in search of ways to help more customers, I really wanted to be aligned with a provider that had history in network. And so, US Signal, throughout our 25-year history, as a digital infrastructure provider, although our product portfolio has changed a lot, there's been one constant, and that has been our network. So we've always been a network service provider. And what's interesting about that is if you think about wherever you are as an organization on your cloud journey or your data and application modernization journey, the one commonality that stitches all this stuff together is the network. And so, you have that critical component of the network. And then, we also have the criticality of security. So in our efforts to secure our networks, right, and protect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of our data sets, we've often struggled with some of the traditional approaches to wide area networking. Although those MPLS services, layer 2 services, they provide us, guaranteed bandwidth and predictable performance with lower latency. And although they are secure and controlled, they're also can be quite complex to manage. And so you have to staff for it, right? You have a kind of a revolving door of operational expenses and capital expenses, and they're very time consuming and complex, right? So it's that disparate security stack alongside the network that has really caused a lot of challenges for us in this space. And so, there's been quite a lot of evolution and innovation in the network space. Sometimes the headlines tend to, lean more towards AI and things like that, right? So you hear a lot about InfiniBand or Rocky, but what we're focused on here at US Signal really is how do we connect and stitch all of our customer environments together, whether they be in a hyperscaler or in a US Signal cloud or in a colo or at their prem, and also help them secure those environments in a better way. So if we kind of think through, this concept of SASE, and we'll provide a brief definition, right? So secure access service edge is what SASE stands for. And it's really, the convergence of SD-WAN and everything that we know that we need from a security standpoint, again, to protect that confidentiality, integrity, and availability of our data sets. And so you can't really talk about SASE without first talking a little bit about SD-WAN, because SD-WAN, or software-defined wide area networking, is the plumbing. And so, just like any other technology stack or technology solution, there's been quite a lot of evolution in that space. And so conceptually, we can kind of break down SD-WAN into three different iterations. The first, not all that exciting, really focused on link bonding, and a lot of the practical implementations in the first iteration of SD-WAN weren't really active, right? They were really more of a backup methodology for connectivity. It wasn't until we started to see the virtualization of the network that we started to see all kinds of really interesting things. And so, as the name implies, software-defined wide area networking. For you server folks, you can kind of apply that same construct of the software-defined data center to this concept, and we now have a portable network, right? So we've essentially abstracted the network from the physical layer, and we can port that over a multitude of different physical layers. So that provides us some interesting capabilities around high availability, and it also allows us to start making more intelligent decisions based on the applications within that network stack. So that second iteration of SD-WAN was really transformational for these types of services. Now, the one thing that was still missing, and again, going back to those two pillars of the criticality of the network, and then the criticality of securing the network, right? Because all of our workloads are accessible and stitched together by the network, so it's a common place of entry for those folks looking, to affect that CIA of our data. So SD-WAN 3.0 addresses this in a much more futuristic way, right? And this is really where we get into SASE, right? Because we've now converged all of the capabilities that we've had traditionally from an SD-WAN standpoint into one platform, at least with Cato. And we'll talk here in a few slides about why Cato is such a revolutionary solution, not only for the network space, but SASE specifically. So we've talked a little bit about the past. We've talked about the evolution of SD-WAN, but from a customer standpoint, what's really driving, right? We've seen and continue to see the hybridization of our workloads. So a lot of hybrid cloud, a lot of multi-cloud. We see an increasing remote workforce, whether that's full-time or part-time. And a lot of the traditional solutions haven't really designed for solving the performance challenges that we sometimes experience as remote users, right? Whether you've been in a capacity of consuming that or supporting it, right, as a technology provider, it's typically a constant pain point for the remote workforce. And then certainly not least, but the last data point, we continue to see a rise in cybersecurity attacks. In 2024, ransomware attacks, the damages are estimated at around $10 billion in losses, which is a really staggering statistic. So this is kind of what we see as the future from an IT decision-making standpoint, and why US Signal specifically has partnered with Cato to solve these challenges. So I happen to have the opportunity to lead product development at US Signal for a short time period, and it was during the time period when we evaluated providers for SASE. And we kind of entered it first looking at an SD-WAN type solution, but as we started comparing notes, we had a pretty large R&D team that was consisted of not only our engineering staff, but our field resources like our solution architects, obviously the product team, our cybersecurity team, and we started comparing notes about, what were the challenges that we were really trying to solve for our customers. And, by and large, it was, really driven by the disparate nature of the security stack alongside the traditional wide area network services that US Signal have been providing for 25 years. And, so customers wanted something that, was more consolidated, right? Just to reduce complexity, bring everything all into, one single pane of glass so that they had more visibility into, what was happening from a network standpoint, and specifically then being able to manage a single security policy with one environment. They were looking for more flexibility from a WAN standpoint. DIA is great, but it's not always available at every location, right? So the ability to, also converge then broadband or a fixed wireless solution so that they could have more availability, almost like you would at a data center, right? We typically have multiple connections into those locations, extending that out, to your branch locations, and providing better availability, and having a software platform that can manage all that for them. We heard our customers loud and clear, just around how much time they were spending managing network, and that was holding them back, right? Every minute that you spend keeping the lights on is time spent away from helping the business innovate and grow. So that was a pain point that we heard loud and clear for our customers and wanted to solve for as well. And then just once if a data breach happened, that ability to exploit lateral movement. So just more around the security aspect of things. And so that was really why we decided that, hey, SD-WAN's interesting, but really what our customers are asking for is converged SD-WAN and security solution. So we went out to the marketplace and started, evaluating different SASE platforms. And, Cato kind of quickly rose to the top as one of the solutions that we were most interested in. We had a long partnership with Cisco. We're a Palo Alto partner. We provide, managed firewalls in our cloud environments that are based on Palo Alto. Fortinet has a fantastic service provider set of solutions, and so we wanted to give things a fair shake. But really, there was three main reasons that Cato stood out. One, they were the only one that was cloud native, right? And if you think about this from an architecture standpoint, what that means to our customers is, once you have this solution in place, you benefit from the scalability of their converged software stacks in all of their global points of presence across the globe, without having to, make iterations or additional investments in on-premise hardware. So we love that idea of the high availability and the scalability of that solution. We're a cloud provider ourselves, so we kind of have to eat our own dog food from that standpoint. The other thing that stood out about Cato was that they were the only ones that had their own global backbone. This was really important to us as a network service provider because, again, if we go back to our history, we've been providing traditional wide area network services for our customers for a very long time. And we know that the faster we get that traffic back onto our core network, it allows us to control the performance of those packets and result in a better performance for those workloads and a better customer experience. Last and certainly not least, one of the things that really stood apart too for Cato Networks was that everything was consolidated into a single management interface. And so if you think about reducing complexity and converging security into your SD-WAN environments, you really need that single pane of glass, right? So integration with your Active Directory environments, so that you can leverage different security groups and apply those policies in a consistent manner, no matter if it's an endpoint or a user. These were all the things that our customers were looking to solve for, and so that's why we went through an arduous process like I said, Cato rose to the top, and we're very proud to be in partnership with them. And SASE is just something that anytime we have a conversation with customers, it's really exciting because it's such a revolutionary approach to modernizing your wide area network and improving your security posture. So we're really excited about it. The totality of this webinar won't even touch, probably 20% of the capabilities. So definitely reach out. We're happy to have more conversations about this. This is a managed service from US Signal, so don't be daunted by the task of having to manage this. We're very adept at managing the Cato solution, built on the same premise that we've always brought to the marketplace, which is a white glove approach to support. So we're here to support you and manage it, and help you design it and implement it. So before we switch over and give Roger the floor, I think we have a few questions that are going to get pumped out here. So should see pop up on your screen a question, a couple questions, right? So first one, where are you on your SASE journey? And then the second, what other topics are you interested in, right? So that will be for future, webinars. Cato's got an evolving stack of services. That's the other really cool thing to point out. So as Cato adds services like the digital experience monitoring, XDR, those become capable within the environment without you having to make any changes, right, to any of your hardware that you have deployed on prem. It shows up in our portal. We can activate that for our customers, configure those policies, and as soon as those are hit from a save standpoint, that policy is pushed down to every endpoint, every global POP, and so a simultaneous securing of your network. So pretty cool, pretty impressive. Another fantastic feature that we love about Cato. So I'm going to turn it over to Roger. I think we'll get the results of that survey, and we can kind of, when Roger finishes up, we'll be able to, well, here we go. We got some popping up already. So Roger, looks like 1 of 6 in the crowd have deployed SASE. And most folks are learning about SASE, which is great. That's awesome. What we're here to, that's what we're here to tell folks about, and specifically why Cato is such a prevailing platform in this space. Their motto, "We are SASE." I'm sure Roger will talk about that. Is really true for the reasons that we saw in some of the preliminary slides here. So looks like some other things that folks are interested in: AI and machine learning. Obviously, zero trust. I hadn't mentioned that yet, but part and parcel to the platform. And then digital experience monitoring. I imagine not much interest because folks may not know exactly what that is, but it's a really interesting element of the Cato solution. So definitely, if you got questions about it, reach out and we can talk through it. So without further ado,
you hit the next slide or the starting slide.
Oh, sorry.
One.
Got a delay on my side.
There we go. The reason I want to start here is I love the title that our marketing team created at one point, because it's the most words I've ever seen on a title slide. But if you think about it, it's securing the unsecurable. What does that mean? And I'm going to talk through a little bit about what makes us build the SASE platform and why did we deliver it. And it's really to talk about how hard it really is to do. So you can go to the next slide, Pat. So the first thing, when you think about this challenge that IT is faced with, there's a whole bunch of technologies that are out there that are all trying to achieve the same thing. And it doesn't matter what the acronym SOUP is here. It's just that the purpose is to ensure that users can do their jobs securely on devices they're on with performance that meets their business objectives. But there's a whole bunch of things that have to be done. So I'll start with, and I know if any of you are engineers on the phone, you'll be happy to know that a sales guy is mentioning NIST 800-207. If you don't know what NIST 800-207 is, it is the NIST framework around zero trust, not zero trust network access necessarily. It's the big umbrella of zero trust. And a lot of the things that zero trust needs is a ton of context. And so if you think about all of these technologies in individual silos, they do have a lot of information. What they lack is a bunch of fidelity. They lack a bunch of interoperability. They lack communication across the board. And to give real context, you need policy engines, policy administration, you need things to enforce the policies, you need trust algorithms that are continually assessing the trust levels. You have to secure the actual data that you're looking at and moving around. You have to monitor it. You have to have analytics. You have to look for trending. That's what makes this really hard. So let me break it down into an author we've probably all heard of, which is Rudyard Kipling, and he has what's called the Kipling method. The Kipling method is the who, the what, the where, the when, the why, and the how when telling a story. So let me start by saying I'm a security administrator, and I have John White, the COO from US Signal, who is logging on from China at 3 o'clock in the morning. Now I know the who. I'm trying to figure out what application he's running. I'm trying to figure out where he's, oh, well, they've got some business operations in China. Maybe that is a valid thing, but he's looking at some HR documents that he really doesn't need access to. That's the reason why security is so complex, is because all of these systems have to vote on whether John White's access into the system at that point from that machine accessing that application is valid. That's why this is so hard. Next click. In addition to all of these things, we've got these enterprise initiatives that are pulling us in one direction. Anybody remember COVID? I'm being funny, of course, but we had this whole business continuity thing that happened overnight without us preparing for it. We had to enable that. We're trying to get more people, fewer people doing more stuff by optimizing our staff. We've got new compliance and regulations that are popping up every day, one more click. And that's where the bugs start to get in. That's where the real mess happens. And according to Gartner, it really is complexity that's the enemy of availability, security, and agility. So the reason that Cato exists is our founders believed that the answer was a platform. One click. We talked about a platform. Let's start with US Signal's Open Cloud. It's a platform that eliminates the low value stuff from the high value stuff. Running servers, running storage, plugging in the plumbing, doing patches is all low-level stuff that is better handled by a service provider. It's why I don't have a generator doing my electricity in my home or a cistern that's putting water to it. I'm much better served by having a service deliver that to me. So then my usage experience is flip a switch and things come on, open a faucet, water comes out. That's what a cloud first mentality and a platform like US Signal's Open Cloud gives so much value, because you as a customer simply want to write business applications that give you a better advantage in the marketplace, increasing your profits, increasing your sales, doing all the things, reducing your costs, and doing that as a platform. It closes a lot of gaps. It eliminates the 80 platforms that you have to, otherwise I call them platforms, that you have to do updates to, and gives a poor user experience, opens you up to risk, increases the amount of downtime. So a true utility type platform is what Cato wanted to build. And we've done it. Next click. Guess who else created a platform? It was Apple. Now I'm going to betray my age by saying I had a pager, and then I had a BlackBerry. I had a flip phone. I had an iPod. I had a digital camera. Eventually I had a tablet. And if you think about it, all of those were in my bag when I traveled at the same time. The reason is, like the last slide, I had silos of use cases. And each of those use cases was unique and didn't interoperate. If I took a picture with the digital camera, it was not easy for me to get it on my BlackBerry and send it to somebody because they were disparate. And that caused me to have a lot of blurry pictures and things that didn't send and bad phone calls. And man, I wish I could get a flip phone again, though. That's a whole nother aside, that how much I loved my flip phone. But the point is, Apple created two things. One is they created a platform that started everything. And it was the least common denominator was, let's build a phone. I can also look at Tesla and say they didn't build a car, they built a computer that had wheels. So changing the paradigm completely. So instead of them trying to build a unique use case that was better than another unique use case, they built a platform. So that is what Cato's vision was 10 years ago when we started. And now that is fully fleshed out. And we're getting partners and customers like US Signal that are kind of giving us huge accolades, and we appreciate that so much of what our delivery has done for the marketplace. So one more slide. By the way, there is a Q&A box that is active. So if anyone has anything for either Pat or myself or the rest of the team, we're happy to answer it. Again, we want to keep this interactive, and we will open for Q&A at the end. But I did want to remind you that if you have questions, you can drop them in there now. I believe the chat box is open as well. So let's try to make this interactive so you don't have to look at my talking head the whole time. But essentially what we've built is this simplified the consumption of all of these tools, much like US Signal's cloud infrastructure has done that. Now it's, you build workloads, you build environments, you build discrete applications on the other platform that's already built, and it's delivered simply. And so we've done that same thing with networking and with security. Next slide. So our kind of view of the world is all of these components that answer the who, what, where, when, why, and how are incredibly important, but the amount of value you get is really tied to how much they are in context with each other. So my argument is the amount of trust you have in a zero trust environment is inversely proportionate to the amount of context you have. So the more context you have, the less trust you have, which means you now know that who, what, where, when, how, and why, and can deliver that from one place. Final click. All of that is delivered in the Cato SASE cloud. Now, Pat and I have presented on many occasions together. We have a lot of other slides that we could go through that show you the architecture. We're up to close to 100 POPs globally. The industrialized world is no more than 20 milliseconds away from any Cato POP. As Pat mentioned, we are adding more and more components to the platform on a weekly basis. In fact, we did over 6,000 enhancements to the platform last year. We're a true DevOps environment. So much like any other cloud utility, we are working at that speed. But instead, one last click, we just want you to know that by converging all of this to a combination of US Signal and Cato, you can get back to innovating with your enterprise initiatives. You can stay up to date with your compliance and regulations. Your staff will be more optimized than ever before because you've offloaded so much as that rote garbage and you've shifted their work to be more business innovation, and then business continuity is already planned for you and ready to be rolled out. So that is all we had prepared today of our prepared comments. We'd love to open it up to any questions or comments. We can delve into, I know we talked a little about zero trust here, but if there's specific questions around AI or others, feel free to shoot them at us. I see no questions in the question box and nothing in chat. So either you were so wowed by mine and Pat's presentation that it answered every question you had about SASE, or we left you wanting more.
So maybe with the few minutes that we have left, Roger, maybe it makes sense to define when we talk about SASE, right? And the definition of secure access service edge being, the convergence of the SD-WAN and everything that we know that we need from a security standpoint. There's a lot of acronyms on this slide.
Yep.
So maybe we could talk through those, kind of from a service level, right? Because, you can do just SD-WAN with Cato, but, the magic happens when we start layering in things like secure web gateway, right? So the folks see SWG on the screen, that's what that stands for. Next gen anti-malware, intrusion protection, data loss prevention, CASB, cloud access security broker, and then obviously the zero trust network access element of the solution. If you folks have questions about, what these different elements are, there's actually more. As I stated earlier, Cato, I think I see a product update from Cato at least once every 2 weeks, if not every week, it seems like. So they're adding, new and interesting things like RBI, remote browser isolation, the digital experience monitoring that we talked about. Folks had questions about AI and machine learning. When we think about Cato and security specifically, that's the next gen aspect of the firewall and the anti-malware solutions, right? So not only is it pulling protection elements from actual definitions that are published, but it's also looking for anomalous behavior and alerting to that and responding based on policy. So I do see one question from Des.
And I could take that, Pat. It's a great question. And here's how this is going to get into context. So obviously, Des is talking about someone using ChatGPT or Claude or Copilot, and is having an opportunity like, okay, that's great. You're trying to optimize your business and do what you're, in marketing or whether you're in research or whatever it is. But how do you make sure that I'm not accidentally exfiltrating company-specific data out to the world that somebody now has access to? Well, the good news is that when you have a platform like Cato, you have multiple technologies that can help you along the way. Let's start with something like CASB. CASB says, am I allowed to use that application? Can that application post or can it only receive? Second, the next layer is then data loss prevention that now says, hey, let's tag all of our data so that we know what's company confidential, what should not be sent elsewhere. Can I use a repository like SharePoint and say, if you have rights to it in SharePoint, you have rights to it locally, which now means if I am, let's go back to John White, and John White has financial information, he can see that. It's and if you're doing your own LLM inside your organization, somebody who's in sales might not be able to get the financial information, but it's part of the large language module. So the answer, Des, is that we have multiple tools that can not only identify the applications that are either native applications in a Microsoft or Mac world, or if they're web-based applications, but we can also look at what is going out, what is coming in. Have we seen that behavior before? And so we can stitch a whole bunch of those together instead of having to have disparate tools and a SOC and a SIM to do all of that, which then loses detail and fidelity when you do that. It's natively built inside the platform.
Yep.
So another question from imagine that, it's John White.
Right.
So what I will say all of those, John, but one thing that people are seeing is first and foremost, there's a hard dollar savings that is just in potentially moving off of kind of private circuits onto DIA or other types of circuits, and they're getting kind of just a hard dollar cost that comes along, savings that comes along there. We're seeing a lot of the soft dollar costs in not necessarily reducing what IT folks are doing. We don't see people really reducing staff, but we do see them increasing the value of what they're doing. So reducing help desk calls. When you have digital experience monitoring and all the telemetry that we give, customer calls in, an end user calls in and says, hey, I'm having trouble getting to this application. The time to resolution is dramatically reduced. We're also seeing that people are dropping their insurance policy rates by showing that this type, now that's almost any cybersecurity platform that you put in, but we do have customers saying, I was able to save X amount of dollars on my policy because I had all of your suite of technologies in. We see user productivity enhancement. So it's no longer, oh man, if you're at Starbucks, I don't want to give you the rights. I don't want to give you rights to do something while you're at Starbucks, but now when you have a platform that protects you, you enable work to go where the users are. So there's a number of those. So great question from Melissa. I'll answer that live. So companies generally have components in various states of their life cycle. How would you approach layering in Cato over time, or does it all have to be implemented at once? Best question so far, because it's one of the big myths that our competitors try to throw out there as FUD. You do not, under any circumstances, need to roll out all of Cato all at once. It's a very modular platform in that you can start with, for instance, let's say your use case is I have users that are all over the country and I want them to be able to get to homegrown applications and web-based applications, but I don't want to backhaul them with an old school VPN. That can be a perfect use case that they don't have any of our wide area network capabilities. They just have access into the end user component of that. The inverse is also true. They might have a competing technology for that VPN replacement, but they haven't modernized their network, in which case you guys can build with US Signal, a great SD-WAN that uses the security components that are there. We can drill into each of those capabilities and say where an entry point can be, but any of them can be implemented at a rate that works for the customer. And I would say 70% of our implementations are not even close to implementing everything. I'd say only about 5% is the whole lock, stock, and barrel. Most of it starts with some hybrid, a lot of it being just the SD-WAN and the basic threat prevention, which is IPS and next-gen anti-malware. So it's more of a modular approach, Melissa, but we can handle it from the beginning to the end.
Yeah, and I would say that's shown true in our practical applications for customers as well, Roger. So definitely the phased approach is what we're seeing.
And Pat, who are you seeing? Des asked a great question. Who are you seeing of solutions and vendors that we're displacing the most? Who have you seen in the market?
Yeah, so a lot of our traditional customer base is still using MPLS. So a lot of times it's a transition from traditional MPLS to the Cato solution. We've seen other customers that have had SD-WAN implementations, and they want to move to Cato because of the fact that it is a single vendor SASE solution. And so we see a lot of Meraki that gets displaced, a lot of Cisco. So most customers, that have Cisco Firepower and Umbrella, they are seeing a cost savings when they change over to Cato. So that's been another big push. Folks that have Zscaler bolted on to an existing SD-WAN solution, that's been another popular transition, just based on the complexity of how that's deployed. I'd say those have been kind of the major use cases that we've seen.
I concur completely. The only thing I would add is what we're seeing as Cato is a lot of displacement of Fortinet and Palo. And I will say a lot of it has to do, it's two factors. One is I think there's renewal costs are incredibly high for some of those folks. And so we do have some people saying, look, I need to move off to a more affordable platform. And then two, they're finding the architecture doesn't match what their use case is. So if 80% of their applications are cloud native and they have a monolithic box that sits in the data center somewhere, that doesn't necessarily match the business process. So I would add those two to your list.
Yeah.
Well, I want to personally thank everybody for taking the time to be with us today. It's always a pleasure to present with you, Pat. And if you guys in the audience have an opportunity to meet Pat, he and his team get this stuff better than any of our partners in the country. These guys have invested in a big way in their technical talent and know-how. So you are in great hands with the US Signal team.
Yeah, thank you, Roger. Always a pleasure. Any opportunity to co-present is always enjoyable. So appreciate you taking the time out. We appreciate our partnership with Cato. Thank you, folks, for attending. And yeah, any follow-up questions, we're happy to answer. So we're here to help. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.